Hi, everyone. My name is Lexi Starosta. Thank you for joining us today for this lunch and learn to hear from parents of children who receive gene therapies and their families' experience in various rare disease communities. So sorry about this delay. We are still having Kim Nye, our moderator from the Test Research Foundation, join us, but there were just some internet issues in this virtual world, but all good. Um, this session is a rescheduled event from December. So thank you to everyone and the sponsors of the Lunch and Learn for joining us today instead. This is the first session of 2023, but we'll officially close out 2022 topics. All previous sessions are available to watch on patienteducation.asgct.org. This site also contains a whole library of gene and cell therapy 101 topics, as well as disease-specific content. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Jen McNary and Amy Medina. They both have amazing families and wear many different hats within their lives. They'll be sharing their stories about their children and how various treatments have affected each one of them a bit differently. Please don't forget to submit your Q&A during the session using the chat feature. We'll definitely go through some of those questions during the discussion portion after hearing a bit from Jen and Amy's stories. So I do want to first welcome Jen to the stage. So Jen McNary is a trusted voice in the rare disease community as a mother, public speaker, and fierce advocate. Jen has unique experience in the drug development field as a parent of children enrolled in clinical trials, an advocate engaging with the regulators, and as a patient engagement professional in the life sciences. Jen was involved in the approval process for all three drugs currently approved for Duchenne. Currently, Jen is the co-founder and principal of Canary Advisors, a boutique patient advocacy consulting firm with a focus on regulatory and access patient engagement. Her other activities include serving as the founder of One Rare, a nonprofit formed to meet the needs of young adults with rare and chronic conditions, and raising her children in Massachusetts. So now I will have Jen share with you her story. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Lexi, and thanks everybody for joining us. As mentioned, my name is Jen McNary, and though I'm the parent of 5 kids, I am going to talk today about my 2 oldest sons and our journey with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Pictured here are Austin and Max, and a younger Jen in front of the White House, which we came to see as part of our journey. So these are my biological babies. They were all born healthy. You can see James, Austin, Max, and baby Nora. All of my boys were born healthy, but later diagnosed with rare diseases. The diagnostic odyssey is the first step in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Diagnosis is really difficult to come to. There are over 7,000 rare diseases, but only 30 or so are on the newborn screening panel. And so most families go through a really long period of time before they are diagnosed. For our family, we were diagnosed after 3 years of knowing that something was different and something was wrong. Our diagnosis came in February, so almost 20 years ago now. Almost 21 years ago now. My guys were diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, more specifically, a deletion of exon 52. I was told to take them home and love them because there was nothing I could do. At that time, the neurologist told me that there was actually no benefit to knowing this early. And here you see the boys shortly after diagnosis. They were just little guys that were diagnosed with a fatal condition. The early childhood symptoms that I saw were extreme gross motor delays. My son, I used to call Austin a little ballerina because he was frequently toe walking, almost constantly toe walking by the time he was 3 and diagnosed due to contracted heel cords. At the time, I just thought it was cute. He had a lot of falls. In fact, he had had a concussion and a broken bone before his 3rd birthday. We were in the doctor's office so frequently. He also showed the Gowers maneuver, so he really struggled to get up off the ground and used to use his hands on his legs to crawl up and stand up. And then, of course, was the fatigue that really is standard in Duchenne. All of these guys are just kind of tired as little kids when they should be running around and playing. The impact of a Duchenne diagnosis is really heavy on the guys that are diagnosed, but also on the family members. There's a lot of emotion surrounding Duchenne, and really a loss of hope. There's a feeling of depression and isolation, and intensive grief. In fact, we know that families are feeling this grief from the moment of diagnosis and confusion around, why me and why us. The financial cost of Duchenne is incredible, both indirect and direct costs. There are the costs of medical interventions and equipment, but also the cost to simply house a person as they become non-ambulatory, or as they lose abilities later on, not to mention vehicles, loss of wages for caregivers and care partners. The physical impact is scary. These folks have osteoporosis, and they fall frequently. They have side effects of medications, and again, that fatigue that causes them to not be able to participate in family life. And then there's also the educational impact. Learning disabilities and cognitive delays are really common, increased autism diagnoses. And then, of course, the missing of school because children are unwell, going to appointments, or taking part in clinical trials as well. So my no help and no hope of the diagnosis changed in August of 2011. This is a picture of Max before his very first muscle biopsy ever. He's just a little 9.5-year-old that was really excited to be a part of making Duchenne history here. He was enrolled in the eteplirsen, now called Exondys, clinical trial. And 6 months into this study, Max's disease trajectory markedly changed, and he was a different kid. At 9.5, he stopped falling. At 9, he had been falling so frequently that I was scared to let him play outside because I knew he couldn't get up off the ground on his own. He was able to walk most of the day after using a wheelchair previously for his entire school day. He stopped using it. It stayed parked in his classroom. And his grip strength improved. He was able to open drink containers. And then he had a decrease in his fatigue. So this first clinical trial for Max, as I mentioned, was the journey from no hope and no help to hope and help. And it's a long journey, and it goes on today, as you'll find out. But I always want to mention the people along the way that helped during that journey. This is one of our favorite physical therapists even today, as you can see in Max's face. This is Linda Lowe's, Dr. Linda Lowe's. She's an amazing physical therapist in Ohio, and was really a really shining star in our clinical trial experience. So here's Max signing on the dotted line. Max had to assent on his own. I always mention this during all of my discussions about participation in clinical trials and what it means to participate. You see this little, I think he was about 10 and a half here, being asked to kind of go through this binder of papers and consent to being part of a research study. And he had to do this multiple times. It's not just a linear parental decision. It's a decision that really impacts the whole entire family. And certainly Max was no exception to that. But the real benefit here was a happier kid and a healthier kid. Max was stronger. He was more confident. He was more able. And it really gave us a huge sense of hope being part of this clinical trial. But unfortunately, Max's older brother, Austin, who had stopped walking at the age of 10, at 12, when Max entered the study, was not able to join into the clinical trial because it was only for ambulatory patients. This started kind of a resounding battle cry on my end to yell to the FDA, to tell anybody that would listen, quite frankly, including the writer of this small newspaper, that it was going to be really important for the FDA and for other regulatory bodies to consider earlier approvals for these types of life-saving or life-changing therapeutics. And so we, as a family, took to the streets, so to speak. We talked to anybody that would listen to approve. To urge approval of this therapy that was making such an impact on Max's life, so that it could help others who were still steadily declining, like Austin. So, of course, when I was interviewed in the newspaper, I was a stay at home mom in Vermont and didn't know anything about regulatory bodies, but they asked me what I was going to do. And of course, I said I'm going to the FDA because surely the FDA needed to hear our voices. And true to that, I have spent over the last decade or so many hours at the FDA at the table discussing what's meaningful to patients. And I continue to think that that is probably one of the most valuable pieces of data that's possible to provide is that anecdotal data, that patient experience data that we were able to provide simply because we lived with our sons every day. I knew what it looked like to decline from Duchenne, and I knew what arresting that decline or slowing it down looked like. And some of that you can't capture during a clinical trial. So we actually launched a campaign called the Race to Yes. This was encouraging our federal government and regulatory bodies to say yes to patients and to say yes sooner. And so this is Max here delivering our change.org petition. We presented it both on the Hill. We also sent it over to the president. President Obama did have to answer this change.org petition. And then we also hand delivered it to the FDA. So Max has been a great little advocate all before he was a teenager. This was a very public journey for our family. We were included in a documentary that filmed over the span of about a year and a half. We were included in articles, and Austin was part of such headlines as the FDA versus Austin Leclerc, which, of course, as a teenager, he thought was pretty cool. We also were front and center as seemingly up against the FDA, when in reality we were just really fighting for a seat at the table. We worked very hard to try to convey to them the importance of looking at patients individually as people and looking at improvements on natural history to try to outlive that diagnosis and that terminal diagnosis that we were given. At our advisory committee hearing, we had over 1,500 families, clinicians, and researchers and supporters show up. Pictured here are Max and his buddy Bill, along with researchers, Dr. Stan Nelson from UCLA, and then myself and Austin, who were both able to testify. So our family is a family of advocates, kind of right across the spectrum, and this was probably the most important day of my guys' lives. And we regularly recount sort of the emotional impact of being here and fighting for the right to change the trajectory of Duchenne. And all of this culminated in an approval. So Exondys 51 was, in fact, in 2016, the first disease-modifying Duchenne approval, and it was attributed with slowing the progression of the disease, extending the walking years, and again, reducing that really impactful fatigue that I talked about. And then importantly, stabilizing pulmonary and respiratory function, not a cure, but a stepping stone to further innovation. And here you see Max, who was lucky enough to be on the website for Exondys. It was a thrilling day for our family, but we were only able to pause for a moment because we knew that there was more to come. We knew that Austin, though he did eventually get on exon skipping, he really had meaningful changes that he was hoping for that aren't always captured in clinical trials. And so it became really important to us to really talk to regulators, researchers, and drug companies to talk about what matters. What Austin's hoping for is an increase in independence and a better quality of life. He wants to be able to breathe, for example. All of his hopes and dreams can be accomplished by having utilization of his hands and being able to breathe and to think and to move on his own. And he really was not attached to the ability to walk. And so it became really important for our family to start advocating for that. We know that there's been so much progress. I was given this fatal diagnosis, and my guys were not supposed to live past, early 20s when they were diagnosed 21 years ago. We know that with the added steroids, they have 2 years of delayed loss of ambulation, which is 5 to 7 years of added lifespan. We know with exon skipping, they have 3 years delayed loss of ambulation added to steroids. There's some early indication of prolonged life and living. And then gene therapy has the potential to be transformative. So looking forward in the pipeline, as I mentioned, there's a lot of potential therapies in clinical trial, but the biggest in my mind was maintaining and protecting the muscle health. So here's some hope for the future. These are two little guys with Duchenne. These are not my boys, but when I think about what do I want for the future, I hope that boys who are diagnosed early via warning and have early intervention, disease-modifying therapies, restoration of dystrophin, and then a future, hopefully, without Duchenne. And we're moving towards that with the added benefits of gene therapy. We know this is Max receiving his gene therapy with Dr. Crystal Proud in Norfolk, Virginia, and we're actually going back for a visit next week. What we've seen for Max is stability. Max has been off of Exondys and has not progressed at all over the last year and a half that he's been on gene therapy. But we've also seen an addition of core strength. Max is able to bend over at his core and pick up heavy things. His posture has been fantastic. He has an increased independence. So Max can be down in his apartment all day long and he can cook his own food, get in and out of bed. And he's able to live a fairly quiet and an independent life, which is what he wants, right? We always want to support these guys where they are. His motivation, he's joined a couple of power soccer and power hockey teams, and he likes going out and about. And he does that on his own. He takes an accessible ride, goes to his practice and comes home, and he has hope for the future. And that to me is the benefit of adding gene therapy to his care. So these are my babies now, Austin, James, Nora, and Max. Though they were not healthy as they were pronounced when they were born, we are all living a fairly normal and natural life as a family. Our lives look a little bit different because of the diagnosis, but it is entirely possible to worry about innovation and to add new therapies to your repertoire and to use every tool that comes along and to live fairly normal lives with Duchenne these days, which is all that I could absolutely hope for. So I would love to keep in touch with everybody. So you can reach me. I know we're going to have a panel discussion, so I welcome any questions or conversations. But here, if anybody wants to get in touch and talk more, I would welcome that. Thanks so much, Lexi.
Thank you so much, Jen. That was so moving. I think it's just amazing to hear things like he wanted to breathe, right? That seems like something that we should be able to offer. So your journey is amazing. I look forward to asking some questions and talking more. But for now, first of all, I should say I'm Kim Nye. I am the founder and executive director of Test Research and the mother of 2 children who have a rare disease. I'm also a member of the ASGCT Patient Outreach Committee. A huge thank you to Lexi for filling in while I tried to drive to better internet. Now we will hear from Amy Medina. Amy lives in Wisconsin with her husband and 3 children. She was a CPS social worker for 14 years and just resigned last year to be a stay-at-home mom. She also occasionally substitute teaches at her children's school. Amy's children all have spinal muscular atrophy, also known as SMA, which has led Amy to be very active in the SMA community. Amy advocated to get SMA on the newborn screening and has given testimony to the FDA regarding treatments. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining and listening to my journey. As mentioned, my name is Amy Medina. I am mother to 3 beautiful children. My oldest is Mateo. He is 11 and a half. Then I have my middle child, Javier. He's 7. And then my princess, Amelia, is 4. And she's heading to school, so she wanted to say good night or goodbye. Bye. Love you.
Well, how we say bye at school?
Yes. Okay. Sorry about that. So my journey in the rare community started over 11 years ago when Mateo was born. I had no idea at that time what spinal muscular was. However, when he was born, he came out very floppy, low tone, hardly cried. And so the doctors were very concerned with him at birth. I just thought I had a chill baby. Little did I know what our journey was going to look like. Mateo was transferred to the Children's Hospital via ambulance, and he stayed there for 4 days, where we were told that he would likely outgrow whatever it was he had and that he'd be fine. That was untrue. When we got home, we noticed some breathing issues, which led us to several ER visits. And again, we were told, like, he's fine. We're overreacting parents. Just take him home. Finally, we kept pushing and pushing, and we kept going to doctors. And at 1 month old, we were told that he had spinal muscular atrophy and that we should take him home and love him, and that he would not see his second birthday. So I was just stressed that he's 11 and a half, will be 12 in July. So he's thriving with SMA. And here are some of our hospital stays with him early on in his life. This is another hospital stay. And the hospital always had visitors come. And so at this point, Russell Wilson came to visit. He was a Badger player at that time. And obviously now he is huge. So our first several months with Mateo, like I said, was in and out of the hospital, trying to learn the disease, doing the best we can to support him, to love him, and to just keep pushing with him. We decided early on at 7 months old that he needed to be trached. So he got his trach at 7 months old, spent a month and a couple days in the hospital. And at that time, there were some clinical drug trials happening, but one of the exclusions was always if you were trached, you couldn't be included. So Mateo never qualified for any drug trials. Here's a couple more hospitalizations, and then the picture on the right is when he finally was able to receive treatment at 6 years old. Once we were comfortable with Mateo and living with spinal muscular atrophy, we decided to expand our family. We knew that we had a 1 in 4 chance with every pregnancy to have an affected child. And via amniocentesis, we learned that Javier was also affected. At that time, we learned that there were drug trials enrolling. And so we were able to travel from Wisconsin to Baltimore. And at 12 days old, Javier was enrolled in a clinical drug trial at Johns Hopkins. So here on the right is Big Brother proudly watching Javi being screened for the trial. And he was accepted. And so this was a very moving picture, a moment in time for us, because on the left, we have a child that never got to be included in a drug trial. And then on the right, we are given this huge hope of, at the time, we didn't really know what the drug was going to do, but we knew that it would do better than what Mateo's life was. I should rephrase that, because Mateo has a beautiful life, but like we knew that the possibility of not having a trach was there, and that like he could do things that Mateo could never do. So trial days are hard. They're very emotional. They're hard on the child. They're hard on the parents. They're long. We went in there blinded, so we really had no idea like how much time a trial would take. So here are some early days in our trial. And then as Javi grew, some more trial days. So Javi gets a spinal injection every 4 months, and he just turned 7 on Tuesday, and his drug trial is ending at the end of this year. So we will be transitioning to commercial insurance, and so hopefully that will not be a fight for us, and he'll continue to get the drug that has given him a great quality of life. He does have a feeding tube, G-tube, and he does wear a BiPAP at night. He can walk, but he can't run. His speech is very garbled because he lost a lot of the muscles around his face. He can't smile, but overall thriving. And the difference between him and his brother is just mind-blowing. And then this is just a mom's view of the left is sending my child off to get anesthesia and get a lumbar spinal injection, and trusting the doctors, with my child's life. And then the right is him coming out of the ER or the OR, and obviously still sleepy, and just sitting there watching him, waiting for him to wake up and say mom, and then we can go on and go home. So then we wanted to expand our family again, and we had our little Princess Amelia. When I was pregnant with her, we knew that there was another clinical drug trial happening for pre-symptomatic babies. And so our team at our hospital worked around the clock to get their hospital a site for gene therapy. Our team was so supportive with us and our decisions, and I think that is key, is supporting the family, because even though the child is the patient, we're like a team, and mom and dad have to be healthy in order to, support our babies going through something. So our team worked to get gene therapy up and running, but we also had a backup that if we couldn't get her to get gene therapy, that she would get the drug that Javier had. So Amelia thankfully met all the qualifications in order to get gene therapy, and at 11 days old, she received that hour-long infusion. So here is her getting that infusion, and so we knew it was a huge day, so we got her a cute little onesie to show that. And this is Amelia coupled. Well, the left is the day of infusion, and then like a month later. So, and then her awesome onesie on the right that her neurologist got her. So Amelia, we decided the gene therapy that would be our number one choice because it was a one-time infusion versus getting a spinal injection every 4 months. And we felt that we were willing to take the chance to see what gene therapy would do. We were hopeful that it would be one step above the drug that Javier got, but if it wasn't, we knew that she would get some benefits out of the drugs, and not have a death sentence. Basically, we were mind blown on the results of gene therapy. She does not show any signs of spinal muscular atrophy at this time, and she's 4. She has met every milestone. She does not need any breathing support. She does not have a G tube. She's just your like typical 4-year-old at this point. She does wear pulse ox at night. This is her new thing for the last 2 weeks. She wants to be like her brothers. Like, she sees the medical world. That's her normal. And she sees her brothers having a pulse ox on at night when they're sleeping. And so her new thing is that she wants a pulse ox because she wants to be like her brothers. So we put our spare one on her just to appease her. The picture on the left is a day in the trial. Even though the infusion was a one-time thing, she did have to get follow-ups in her trial. So she had PT, she had blood work, she had EKGs, multiple things just to monitor to make sure that she was safe and to collect data. After her drug trial ended, it was 18 months, COVID had hit. So then our hospital didn't carry over to the extension program because of COVID. So she went a year and a half, I think, without being seen by the doctors for the extension. But then the hospital finally enrolled, and now she's a part of the extension until she is 15 years old. So we go twice a year now to get some PT testing and all the other lab work. And then this is just a picture of the kids growing up. And then our family today, we're connected to Cure SMA. Our end goal is to find a cure for this disease, but in the meantime, gene therapy is the closest that we have to a cure. It's not it yet, but close enough. Or not close enough. It's close, but we need to keep going to find that cure for this disease. And I'm thankful that most of the states now do screen SMA on newborn screening, and there are 3 FDA-approved drugs for SMA. So babies are getting screened faster, and they're getting treatment earlier, and life looks great for these children. Thank you for allowing me to talk, and please send any questions my way.
Oh, you both have such beautiful families. Thank you so much for sharing your stories, and I'm excited to ask a few questions, I encourage the audience to put their questions in the chat. I thought I might start with just the decision-making process. How did you decide to enroll in these trials, and who helped you decide? I don't
Who
know.
did you want to start with?
Yeah, I guess let's start with you, Jen. You told your story first.
Sure. So thinking about clinical trials in general, the decision's easy in Duchenne, or at least it was, over a decade ago, because we know what the alternative is, right? So these kids do not have a long life expectancy, and we know what happens when you don't do anything. And so in my mind, with no treatments and no options, it was obvious we were going to do a clinical trial. And in terms of which clinical trial, because we certainly had a couple of options, but in decision making, I do not have a background in medicine or in research, but I do have a lot of people in my life who do. And so I leaned on, those doctors and researchers, those nonprofit organization leaders that had the opportunity back then to engage directly with companies and really find out what was going to have the best impact for my guys. But there were not that many options. And then for me, I was never interested in really treating symptoms. So it was important to me that the drug trial that we chose was something that was meant to treat the underlying reason for the disease.
Amy, did you have a decision-making process and a team who helped you come to that decision? I guess 3 decision-making process, different decisions.
Yeah. So when I was pregnant with Javi, I was not going to have an amniocentesis done because it didn't really matter to me. I mean, we wanted another child, and so we were going forward with the pregnancy. But when I was probably 4 or 5 months old, pregnant, Mateo's doctor said, there's these drug trials and they're enrolling pre-symptomatic babies. And so I think you really should, know ahead of time so we can move forward with that if that's what you would like. And I had not followed any of the trial information at that time because I knew Mateo could never qualify for anything. So my mama heart just didn't look at anything that was happening in the SMA world for treatments. But when that doctor told me there was a pre-symptomatic trial enrolling patients, at that point, my husband and I talked and we said, no, we should move forward with this and try it. So Mateo's doctor was the one that led us with Javi. And then obviously with Amelia, when we learned that there was a different drug trial enrolling, the team supported us. I knew it was out there and we just moved forward with it.
Thank you. I think that answers one of the questions from the chat, which is, did the availability of trials and therapies impact your family planning decisions? It sounds like it did impact just your eagerness to test.
Yeah. I mean, we wanted to expand our family no matter what. We were hopeful that we were going to be on the other side of the 1 in 4, 75% chance we were not going to have an affected baby. So we expanded our family and with hope. And obviously when that wasn't the case, then, we were glad that there were these trials available to help our children.
Another question from the chat, which kind of information from the scientific part made you feel confident about the gene therapy? And maybe we'll start with Jen again and then go to Amy.
Sure. So as I mentioned, I'm always looking we know that the lack of dystrophin is what causes the muscle weakness in Duchenne. And so to me, again, with my very simple and non-scientific brain, I was looking for a restoration of dystrophin. And I knew from gene therapy that Max made a little bit more dystrophin. And so in my mind, I was looking for, was there an improvement on exon skipping for dystrophin production? And then, of course, we always want to look at the improvement in skills or abilities overall. So were these kids moving better and feeling better throughout the day? And so you can learn that from the clinical data that's presented at any of these, conference presentations. And so, feeling confident about gene therapy as another and better option is really, for me, around dystrophin production and clinical benefit. The clinical benefit that means the most to us is not necessarily walking, but we know that if the kids are walking better or walking longer, then you know that it's muscle, right? And so it stands to reason that it would impact, in my mind, my older sons as well. So I felt pretty secure in having Max enrolled in gene therapy as well.
Amy, were there scientific elements that made you more comfortable?
Honestly, no, because I didn't research. I didn't know. I just trusted the doctors saying like this is a one-time infusion where the body's going to be tricked thinking that they have the gene. Amelia was the first pre-symptomatic baby in the trial, so I didn't really have another pre-symptomatic baby to like look at. So we just trusted that it was going to work, and we just went forward with it.
That's amazing. I know it has to be a scary day, like you said. You also touched on the fact that Amelia will be followed for 15 years. Like, I'm wondering if each of you can weigh in on the after part, any sort of medications or process that happens after a precision therapy is delivered. Jen, do you want to start again?
Sure. Yeah. So we do know that there's going to be great value in following these patients for a long time. And it's going to be important to have that long-term data, both for reimbursement and access purposes, but also for improvement. If there's going to be redosing or if there are going to be improvements made in vectors, we need to see how this impacts these folks, these kids well into their teenage and adulthood when they're young. And then, for Max, we're continuing. As I mentioned, we're going back for a clinic visit next week. So I think that the big thing for our family, or what we're trying to convey, is that once you receive the benefit of gene therapy, you're not receiving really any added benefit going back to the site and being followed long term. So I always convey to folks that it's really important to make sure that families understand the value of data and make it as easy and as smooth as possible to stay in these clinical trials. Because it doesn't necessarily benefit our family anymore. It benefits, it's an altruistic move. It's a labor of love to pack my kid into a plane as a non-ambulatory adult and go to Norfolk, Virginia. It's really important that we make sure that the community understands the value of long-term data and is treated well and make sure it's a smooth process.
And Amy, for you, I guess you still make regular visits to receive treatments for your middle son. But what does it look like? What do you envision the next 10 years looking like in terms of follow-up?
Well, for Javi, as long as he's on that drug, he's going to continue every 4 months to receive that. And Amelia, I'll echo everything that Jen said. It's just important to long-term data. Like, there's not anybody before Amelia, and to gather information. I want to help the community in a whole, and there was estimated patients before my children that committed their time to trials. And now that I'm in a trial, I want to do the same and give back. And I could easily not do the follow-up, but I want to have that research or, that data collected so that it could be helpful if something were to need to be changed, that we have that information. When Amelia first received the gene therapy, there was a month long that she had to be on steroids. And so we had to monitor all that and safely wean her off the steroids.
And can you tell when Javi needs his next ASO dose? Can you talk through, what the the value that you can see in the drug?
Yeah. So we unfortunately we can. So it's every 4 months. There is a window, so it's not exactly every 4 months. If it doesn't fit in the doctor's schedule or our schedule, it might be, 3 months, 3 weeks, or 4 months, 1 week. But typically 2 to 3 weeks before Javi is due for that dose, we do see him falling more. He can walk, but he trips easily. He just fatigues. He can, now that he's 7, he can tell us how his body's feeling, and he'll say my legs hurt, Mom. I worked too hard today, and So we do see a slight decline in him, and we know that dosing is coming around. And school says the same thing to us now too. They're like, we can tell that he's ready for that injection because he's fatiguing more in school.
Wow. Another question from the chat, maybe a broader question. It says, what is the most meaningful to patients? And are the clinical trials we're designing and products we're commercializing a good fit? Jen, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure. So I think, as I mentioned in my talk, what's meaningful to patients changes over time, right? So in order to understand what's meaningful to patients, you need to look at the patient population through its entire life cycle of disease progression and find out what's meaningful. So I can tell you what's meaningful to my family, and from what I've heard, I've spent a lot of time in the Duchenne community. We've been here over time. So certainly stabilization is the number one factor. People are pretty well adjusted to where their child is, and I know that's an interesting concept, but we adjust and we adapt. And so for us, it hasn't always been improvement. It's been, let's not get any worse, because that's hard. Adapting every couple of months to a new deficit is really hard. And so for our family, both of my guys are non-ambulatory. Most people assume that nothing of value is going to happen if they can't walk again. And in our family, being in wheelchairs is normalized. And we've been doing this for a number of years, and that's fine. But for my oldest son, I think, who is the most disabled person in this house, he wants to be able to breathe. He wants to not be ventilated. He would like no surgical interventions. He would like to not have spinal surgery. He'd not like a feeding tube. He'd not like a trach. He does not want to be in pain. And he wants to be able to use his keyboard and use his phone. He's going to school for mechanical and biomedical engineering. He does some consulting. He runs a nonprofit. He'd like to be able to do those things. And so for him, it's very much a pragmatic approach. Can he use his hands? Can he move his body? And how does he feel? Pain levels. And I think all of that impacts the mental health and quality of life. For some families, losing ambulation feels like the end of the world. And so, when we're talking to really young families, I think what's meaningful to patients is maintaining whatever they've got and not losing it. And then the second part of what you asked was, is this industry doing a good job? I think there's always room for improvement. You're doing a better job than we were 10 years ago, than we were 15 years ago. But certainly we could be doing a better job incorporating patient experience and patient wants and needs to save time, to save money on drug development, and also to make sure that we don't miss our mark and create a product that nobody wants to be in the clinical trial and nobody wants the end product, right? It's not meaningful. So I think we could do a better job simply by listening to patients and putting them where decisions are being made.
Absolutely. Amy, I don't know if you have thoughts along those lines in terms of like whether the products are matching up to what the parent expectation is or what's meaningful for kids. I mean, I think you were in a slightly different position, at least with Amelia, because she was pre-symptomatic.
Right.
But maybe talking through what your expectations were heading into it. Did you expect her to be doing as well as she's doing? Or, what were your expectations heading into it?
Yeah. No, I did not expect her to be doing as amazing as she is. I had Javi to compare, like him getting some type of treatment. So I was hopeful that she was not going to have a trach. I was hoping that she would be able to sit up. I was realistic in my expectations. Like, I know what SMA is. I know that even though she received treatment, she's still always going to have SMA. So I was just very open and like, if she can hit a milestone, that is great. We'll celebrate it. If she can't, it's not a big deal. Like, we will, we love her. She's unique. It's fine. So just having an open mind and not compare. Like, I didn't have children to compare her to, but like now that gene therapy has been around for SMA for a bit, I often see parents comparing, like, what can I expect at 4 years old? Well, each child's different no matter what. And so it's hard as a parent not to compare, but that is something that you should not do, is because a drug can affect a child differently. And like we see that in Javi with kids that are similar to age to him. One could not walk for several years and Javi was walking already. So So my big thing is just open mind and not compare.
I love that. Let's see, we have a question about finances. This one's for you, Jen. How much did you have to pay for, I guess, how much did you have to pay out of pocket? Sorry, I'm going to butcher the name of the drug, which you'll
Eplorsen.
know. Thank you. And then, Miss Medina, you said the SMA trial is ending and the therapy is going commercial. Have you gotten any hints about what you'll have to pay? So maybe we'll start with Jen with your out of pocket costs and then shift to Amy.
So that's an easy one. Max is no longer on Eteplirsen or Exondys, which is the commercial name, and we never had to pay anything because there is a free drug program. As a consultant and as a person that has been utilizing a marketplace insurance plan, I have had coverage over time. So at certain times when certain plans and the stars align, there has been coverage for Exondys. It's not common for Medicaids in certain states to cover. So Mass Health has never covered. And that's a problem, right? It's a problem for a lot of our families that some of these innovative therapies, which are coming through the pipeline and, going through the FDA pretty quickly these days, things are accelerated in the regulatory realm. We know that the payer landscape is not keeping up. So that's been a problem. But personally, the cost has not impacted us or our family or our care. But we know that that's not true for everybody. People spend a lot of time battling and waging wars against. And quite frankly, I think that's why gene therapy is even more attractive for us because, a once weekly infusion, you're continually every year when your insurance plan changes and you have to demonstrate benefit over and over in every prioritization, there's a problem and things get denied and you're on a bridge program and it's really hard to navigate. The idea of dealing with that once and getting dosed and not having to deal with that weekly is really exciting.
The price of some of these drugs certainly make the headlines on a regular basis these days, I think. But I think the cost of living with these disorders and diseases is extremely high too. But it is a hot topic, I think. And Amy, do you want to discuss the SMA trial ending and the therapy going commercial and what that means for your wallet and also for your family?
Yeah. So fortunately, when you're in a trial, things are covered. So you don't have to worry about the expense piece, which is amazing because we have so much other things to worry about. And so Javi's trial kept getting extended. It was when we enrolled in it, I believe it was supposed to be only 2 years. And then they wanted to keep collecting data. So they just kept extending it and extending it. And so last month, we finally got the email saying this is the last year. So his last dose will be October. And so then February of 2024 will be when we go locally to get it. We do know that the drug is $125,000, and that's just the drug piece. That's obviously not putting him under. He needs to be put under anesthesia because obviously it's a spinal injection, and all the other costs that go in the hospital setting. We know from Mateo, because Mateo had received the drug for a little bit, we had to fight insurance with him, mainly because he was trached and there wasn't improvements per se. Like I felt an improvement, but obviously data said no. And so we had to fight insurance with Mateo getting that drug. And then Javi was on dual treatment when I was working for 3 months. My insurance had covered a second treatment for him. And we really saw benefits of his smile coming back. He wasn't choking. He was able to swallow better. And then when I left my position, obviously we couldn't get covered anymore. And then when my husband's insurance kicked in, that insurance wouldn't cover that dual treatment, mostly because he's in a trial. That was their reason for denying that. And so we will start the plan, submitting everything like early on. I think our doctor said like by October, we're going to see where insurance is going to go. And hopefully there won't be any hiccups with them approving it. But we really don't know because for 7 years he's been getting it in a trial. And now we're going to have to say, here, insurance, now we need you to pay for it. And it's always a battle with insurance for anything.
Yeah, I think that covers the other question in the chat, which is about insurance issues and access issues. I mean, it sounds like they are real and but still in the future for you right now. Jen, did you want to add anything to insurance issues or access issues?
That is another webinar. Insurance and access is forever a challenge across the board when you're talking about living with a rare or chronic illness, right? Everything is a fight. Nothing is automatic. Getting services is a battle. But I would say that we are getting more savvy as a community, and I think that companies are getting more savvy, and that there are a lot of places that patients can kind of ready the environment for access and reimbursement when we know something new is coming, right? There are opportunities for testifying and letting folks, legislators, know what's going on. And so I do think that we're doing what we can, but I don't think it will ever not be an issue. You know, people do not understand the value of treating sick kids and sick adults who, you know, are in need of innovative therapies. There's never enough information, and you know, there's always a temperature for, you know, for not treating because you don't want to spend money.
Absolutely. What is your outlook for the future of, you know, each of your children's diseases? Maybe we'll start with Amy.
I'm hopeful. You know, like I have not thankfully seen any regression in Amelia, and so I'm hopeful that she's going to continue thriving. I'm hopeful that future children with SMA are going to, you know, not ever hear that death sentence that I was given with Mateo, and just that they're going to be quote unquote typical children.
And Jen, what's your hope?
So this is, my kids are living in their future, right? So, you know, without being really cliche, you know, at the ages that they are, every day is sort of borrowed. So, you know, they're not little kids anymore. Max especially has lived through history, right? He's been plucked off of a cliff several times by the introduction of a new treatment. And so I'm thankful that they're here. I'm thankful that today they're living very good lives. They're receiving educations, they're chasing their dreams, they're doing what they want. But I'm not naive enough to think that Duchenne is settled for them. You know, they were pretty advanced in their disease progression, much like Amy's first son, so that, you know, we are plucked back from the cliff, but we're kind of dangling here. And so we are hopeful that I think Max's outlook physically is a lot brighter. You know, he did get gene therapy. Austin did not make it into the gene therapy study because of his pulmonary function. So he does continue to decline in that way. And I'm hopeful that you know, he will be okay. But this is, you know, this is just the cusp of it. So I guess hopeful is our line of the day.
I so admire like both of you and all that you've been through. Like, how do you guys maintain just that sense of optimism and balance? Any secret sauce that you can share? Amy, go ahead.
It's not easy all the time. I don't know, like some days are good, some days are not good. I've learned to live like this is our normal. This is for 12 years I've lived in a rare disease community. I have a child that is trach that needs care 24/7, that, you know, I have to line up a nurse to take him to school. And so my early years weren't as hopeful and optimistic, and like I struggled a lot. And I started therapy early on, and I continued in therapy, and I think that's key for me, at least, is having that outlet where I can talk freely about what's happening in my world, what's happening in my life, connected to other moms and dads that have kids as well with rare diseases. I just have a good support system, and I know when I'm not doing well, and I know who to talk to, and just try to remain hopeful and optimistic. And my children are my world, and just seeing them thriving is just like makes me feel better. And then, you know, we travel, we do things, we live a typical life. And so I don't know if that answered it, but
Absolutely.
like, you know, every day can be different, but you just have to like make sure that you don't get into a hole. And just find your support, and that's key.
And Jen, what keeps you optimistic?
So I think it's knowing, and this is such a funny quote, but the Mr. Rogers quote of look for the helpers, right? So my house and my life is a state of chaos at all times. It's one sort of tragedy after another, right? It's health tragedies, it's financial issues, it's there's always fires to put out, and then my career is in rare disease, right? So we run an advocacy organization for young adults trying to find their way living with rare disease. And then I also run a consultancy working with companies and nonprofits to solve for rare disease difficulties in drug development. And so there's always a fire to be put out. There's always something to do. But along the way, you find the other people who are working just as hard as you are. And who are the helpers. So that's, the scientists, that's the researchers that stay up all night, that's FDA regulators who, will sit and cry on a Zoom call with you and you realize they're human. And, these are the parents and the kids and, the other people that are really just in it with you. And you realize that you're all kind of in it together. You're on the same boat, but you're in the same ocean. And so, learning that everybody's in it with you and everybody's living it with you, you realize that it's not something to panic about anymore. And so, we just kind of take a day at a time. I don't immerse myself in kind of what's happening tomorrow. Everybody that knows me knows that I have, complete ADHD, and I'm always distracted and it's always chaos. And I'm always saying yes to one more thing. But I think that that's sort of my way of saying that I'm just going to keep moving, because when you stop is when the swirl starts. And then I would also just say that my kids are kind of phenomenal individuals, and hopefully they're not watching because their heads are already big. But I'm impressed by a son who was, for example, sending out reminders about an upcoming board meeting to our advocacy board while admitted to the hospital this week. I think if you look at the way that they push through, whether they're a child that's attending to school or an adult who's trying to get a degree that you could never even consider attempting while living with rare, you kind of have to go through because you have no place kind of whining anymore.
Well, thank you for saying yes to us today. I'm glad you say yes to things, and your families just are truly remarkable. So thank you to both Jen and Amy for being so open about your stories and what you experience with gene therapy and clinical trials and what it's been like for your children. It's just been an honor to talk with you today. I also want to thank our audience for attending this session and thank those who have tuned in to prior Lunch and Learns. We hope you have found value in what is shared. This recorded session will be posted on the patient education website early next week, and an email will be sent out once available. If you found this information useful, please feel free to share it. The next Lunch and Learn series officially kicks off next month on February 23rd. Speakers will take a closer look at gene therapies approved in 2022 and the status of them post-approval. Registration will be open on the ASGCT patient education site after this session, and we hope you'll join us then. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.